at as fun, but it's really only fun a little bit. And what I mean by that is the amount of fun that you're going to have from ganking someone the first time is huge. Like that first super carrier kill mail is amazing. I haven't gotten my first Titan kill mail yet, and that's like a major ambition of mine in the next year. I want to kill a Titan. Um, so the first time that you do that, the first time you kill someone in solo PvP, there's a huge rush. The difference between fights and ganks is that after a while, the ganks become pretty routine, unless someone starts crying to you about how that was like the last ISK they have in the game, and like they raided their children's college fund to plex into a super capital or something. And at that point, that's kind of funny because it's almost certainly like a lie to make you feel bad. But the actual like gank itself is kind of boring. But when you fight someone, whether this is in low sec, even in a frigate, or you're FCing a bunch of even carriers and dreads, and you drop someone where they can actually fight, and you come out ahead, like that's a huge deal because like what you did made the battle come out the way that it did, and that's why I FC. I FC for that, not so much for the ganks. The second assumption that I have about PvP is that strat ops are closer to ganks than to fights. And what I mean by that is pretty simple. When you're doing a strategic operation, for example, if you're in the NSC and you're trying to take control over structures, or you're in the initiative and you want to make a horde keep star go away in Northwestern Cloud Ring because it covers like all of Cloud Ring, you have an objective, and that objective matters to your alliance, to your corporation, to the people that you spent time with. And that means that more than necessarily having fun or learning, you're there to win. And so there's a great phrase that the goons coined years ago, hell dunks or blue balls. And what that means is when you're fighting a war, when you're fighting for an actual important objective, you don't fight unless you're sure you're going to win, because it demoralizes your enemy almost as much for them to form a ton of people and not get the fight as it does for them to form a bunch of people and then lose terribly. And so if there's something really important going on, then you should probably really plan that fight to win, and not necessarily to just get some kills and have some fun. That's for less important stuff. The third principle that I sort of approach this game with is that I don't like wasting my fleet mate's time. And what that means is, so there are ways of arranging ganks, if that's what you want to do, that are very low effort for most of the people involved. That is, everyone who's out in space when you're running a Black Ops fleet, for example. Everyone who's out in space doing something is doing something very actively. They're, roaming through a region. They're trying to find people to drop. They're dodging gate camps. They're doing all these other things that are engaging and interesting. And then the people who aren't doing that, they pretty much can leave their speakers turned up and go fold laundry or something, as long as they can get back to their keyboard when someone's about to get tackled. And if you're going to play it that way, then you're not wasting your fleet mate's time at all. I can log in for a Black Ops fleet and just check out of it and grade my undergrad's papers or something, and I'm not wasting any of my time, right? And if I'm roaming 35 combat scepters through 3.5 regions trying to find Vexor Navy issues to kill, I am wasting my time. I have to actually align and warp and make sure I jump at the end of every warp, even if I'm just a line member. And after a while, that gets old, because how many Vexor Navy issues do you have to kill before you've sort of seen one and then seen them all, right? So I don't I like roaming to find fights. I don't like roaming to find ganks. And I really don't like roaming to find ganks when it involves, flying really light stuff that doesn't really, catch my interest. If I'm doing solo PvP, that's one thing, but I feel, because if I'm doing solo PvP, I don't necessarily feel bad if I like run away and don't get content. But if I'm FCing a roam through lowsec and a bunch of hyper kittens or something, and I don't find any actual fights, I feel bad as an FC because I didn't really get the kind of content or deliver the kind of content to my fleet members that I wanted to. And so I try to avoid I try to avoid wasting time, and I try to do things that are actually fun and get me the biggest probability of actually having the kind of fight that I find fun. Does that make sense to people? You can like type in the channel or whatever. You don't necessarily have to speak up. Cool, cool. All right. So let's talk about the learning goals for this lecture. I was taught to do this when I started learning how to teach undergrads, and I found that it's actually very helpful. So these are the things that I really want you to figure out or to understand at the end of the lecture, the abilities that I want you to develop. The first thing that I want to do, I want to teach you is I want to teach you the difference between scouting and tackle. I want you to be able to distinguish between the scouting role, which is a specific role that requires certain types of knowledge of the game, the meta, and like tools outside the game to use it, that you use effectively, and tackle, which is something where you can warp in and put a point on someone and just, the rest of the fleet comes in and wrecks them. That's not a bad thing. It's important to do that or else you don't get kills, but it's not scouting, and you shouldn't think of it that way. We'll talk more about that in a minute. The second learning goal is that I want you to understand the concepts of scouting, intelligence, and recon. These are three distinct ways of interacting with information in this game that all are crucial in a successful fleet. So you want to be able to use and understand each of those concepts. The third goal is that I'd like you to be able to identify sources of intelligence in your operational area. And that means you don't have to know this stuff already, but if you live in the LoSec campus and you don't know, who lives in Placid and who lives in Blackrise, and who in those two regions are threats, we can probably add in Verge Vendor and like that little chunk of essence between Verge and Blackrise. If you don't know those areas of LoSec in the faction war zone, that's okay. You can learn them later. But what I want you to be able to do at the end of the lecture is to be able to identify the way you would get that information. And then the final learning goal is that I want you to be ready to use intelligence and scouting in your fleets and your roams and your strat ops if you take those out, because that's really how all of this cashes out, altogether. Any questions about those goals before we get going? I know that there's probably a lot that isn't clear yet, but that's okay. I'm wondering if there are any questions about like what this all even means. Okay, I'm not really seeing anyone, jump up and down in the lecture channel. Yeah, Declan, are you seeing the slides okay?
I'm still on slide 1.
None of you are on slide 4?
Nope. Correct.
No. Oh, what the hell? I don't even know how that would happen. Let me.
There's slide 4.
There's slide 4. Okay, that's really weird.
Okay, no, that's great. That's cool.
Okay, well, we're done with slide 4 now. So I'm going to click to slide 5, and I want you guys to let me know if you can actually see slide 5, okay? Do you guys see that?
Still slide 4.
Okay, do you see slide 5 now?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So here I'm going to briefly describe how most folks in the uni do scouting now. And if this doesn't sound right to you, speak up. And if it does sound right to you, just like, throw a +1 in the lecture channel or something, because it's not surprising to me. So yeah, so here's the brief overview. Yeah, Turlo has it right. You plus one into the next system and you go tackle something. So a lot of scouts in the uni are actually very new players. They're people who can't actually fly the correct fit for DPS in the fleet, and so they fly a slasher or some other like attack frigate, or they fly a stiletto, or occasionally someone in Eve Uni flies a crow because they don't know that crows are bad. Um, and they have three. You can sort of describe what they do in three sets of things. The first thing is your scout learns to use D-scan at least a very basic level, sort of being able to warp to a scan perch and focus scan the plexes and low sec and figure out if something's there. And then you warp there and tackle them. Your fleet comes in and murders them, and you're good. Defensively, you have the scout +1, so you don't like jump a fleet of caracals into like a super capital camp, as has occasionally happened. You check for bubbles if you're in nullsec, and you watch out for Sino-Tengus because someone might drop at you. Um, and then if a fight actually breaks out on the fleets where a fight ever happens, the scout, or so-called scout, the guy flying a scepter, points things, maybe burns off and creates a ping for the fleet if the scout is like super elite. The scout like gets warp-ins for people sometimes. Like, these are all good things to do, but what I'm going to tell you is that this is not scouting, basically. And what it is sort of a very classic component in EVE Online, where you have a newbie who as the ancient goon propaganda has it, the newbie tackles the enemy scout, the enemy scout dies, and as a result, like, their entire the entire path of the war changes, right? So every ship counts. Join Goon Swarm today. um and that's not a bad thing, but it's not really what I want to emphasize here. And it's something that a lot of you already understand, a lot of you already do it fairly well, but it's what I'm trying to do here is get you to sort of level up beyond that. So let's look at the next slide. Can folks see it now?
Yep, all good.
Awesome. So um the I want to say that understanding scouting in that way is wrong, and it is wrong, but it's not wrong in a way that ruins things. Um, you can generate content this way. Either by scouting the fleet into something because you didn't know better, or missing information and your fleet gets caught, but you maybe get some kills as your ships all die. Um, but that's not necessarily a bad thing when you're just starting out. It if you're relying on your newbie tackle pilot to get information, and then to get tackle, and then to get content for the fleet, the newbie is learning how to descan, which is great. The newbie's learning how to report back in a not totally panicked way what's going on. So when you jump into when you jump into Tama, and there's a bunch of jackasses with like a Maulus Navy issue and a Daredevil and then a whole bunch of heavy DPS, and when your scout has properly learned, your scout reports that in this tone of voice, as opposed to screeching and saying, I'm tackled, I'm dying. um and the other thing is, the tackle pilots often learn some basic manual piloting, right? Because if they don't learn how to manually pilot while they're trying to hold point on a cruiser in in an executioner, if they don't learn how to manually pilot, they'll just die, and eventually they'll learn. And then the final thing, and this is like a fundamental truth of EVE University, right, is that whelping is a kind of learning opportunity. Every time you lose a whole fleet, this gives you the chance to learn from your mistakes and do better again, and that's not a bad thing. That's actually a really good thing. By the way, just read this bit in red. A lot of people spell whelp with an H. This is a I think, a case of autocorrect causing problems for them. Whelping comes from what you say after the disastrous mistake that seemed like a good idea, which is, well, it's not to have a litter of puppies, and if your approach to PvP involves canine procreation, you're doing it wrong. Let's move on to the next slide now. And the next slide is what's actually wrong with this sort of approach to scouting. And the first thing I'm going to say is that, like, there was maybe a time like 10 years ago when plus oneing your fleet with a frigate was like the default way of gathering intelligence. But I will also say that if you look at this, this screenshot from the Eve University wiki, you'll see that, at least to a limited extent, at some point, someone in Eve University codified these other scouting roles that are actually like more important to scouting than hero tackle is. And it seems to me that the fact that most fleets in Eve Uni sort of think of the scout as the hero tackle suggests that, compared to whenever someone put this article together, the uni's not like the uni's doctrine around scouting and intelligence is actually like degraded, it's regressed, it's gotten worse. And so this lecture is supposed to help fix that. More substantively, right, if you think of fast tackle, which is finding people, putting a point on them so the fleet can catch up and kill them, and flying a scepter, which is like, checking for bubbles, making pings during a fight, like those are all standard things to do when you're flying a scepter. If you're in a scepter and you're not like getting pings or getting points on important targets during a fight, like you're not doing it right. You're not contributing to the fleet in the way that you should. But while those are all good, they're not scouting. And when you think of them as scouting, like, you lose this source of intelligence that's very useful. Some other issues. The first one is that when you just plus one scout and you don't properly gather intelligence and you don't properly get information in space with your actual scouts, this sets you up for failure. And what I mean by failure is that you risk losing an entire fleet, and so that's the whelping part. But you lose the entire fleet in ways that seem unpredictable, where it doesn't seem like you could actually learn something from it. So this happens in two ways. The first one is you just get hot dropped or surprised by something that was totally outside your weight class. Your fleet gets a murder zoned, and then you feel like, well, you got surprised, but like a lot of the time you write this off, you make excuses, right? It's because CFT are jerks and they drop caps on frigates. It's because our draw don't give good fights, they just like to upship you and then outblob you too. Or you can come up with any other person you don't like and give exactly the same like set of complaints. Black Fox and Roy Henry and people like that, they fly pirate cruisers and they only ever fight frigates and destroyers, right? Like, you can give this whole set of like frustrating excuses for the people you don't like, but like, in reality, that's not what went wrong. What went wrong is that you failed because you didn't gather intelligence, and then you got surprised by someone who was bigger than you doing what they were going to do anyway, and you need to do better. The second way that this goes wrong is that you lose fights that you could have won, and you die in fights that you could have avoided because you just weren't prepared. Like, and we'll give a couple very good examples of that near the end of the lecture. The last reason that you need to like scout and gather intelligence properly is that you get a lot better chance of getting good fleet fights that way. Um, if you don't know where enemy fleets are in the area you're operating in, you're not going to get good fleet fights because you don't know how to find them. If you are running around trying to gank things with your hero tackle, and you just do that, then you're not looking for fleet fights. And then as a result, if a fleet, warps in, if you have a bunch of tweets or whatever, I think of them with a different word, but apparently it's not unisafe. If you've got a bunch of, dual prop thoraxes in low sec and you're shooting at a snuff rattlesnake or two, someone trying to elite PvP in battleships, and then the system spikes and the in-gate is only 1 AU away, and suddenly like Galmil is there in 24 caracals and they just start murdering you. That's going to be pretty non-consensual, like you weren't planning on that and you didn't want the fight to happen that way, and you get very little warning because you thought it was a gank and then it turned into you guys being the ones getting ganked, and that's not good. You don't want that. So we're going to learn how to scout properly and actually use intelligence in ways that let us set up the fights that we want and avoid the fights we don't want. So we're going to start talking about that. Any questions about like why you need to do this? Do people feel that's, does this sound like real experiences that you guys have?
Yeah, for sure. It's real experiences for sure. I mean, sometimes we do a better job than the stereotypical, typical uni scouting +1 kind of find a thing, tackle it, repeat. But it is less common.
I'm wondering, Declan, what types of fleets in your experience do you have like the best usage of intelligence typically?
Um, when we have, it's actually when we have the goal of going out trying to get a fleet fight. When we're flying something that's bigger than frigates, and so we have to be a little bit more intentional about how we move because we can't just run away anytime we want. And
I
when
think
when it's somebody that's either the FCS set out to okay, I want to find a fleet fight, find who's out right now in fleets, and then you use like Z kill or EU overmind or something, and you find who's out there.
right. And that's good. I think there's another category of situation where Eve Uni folks do a fairly good job of having intelligence, although it's not always transparent to the FC, which is that when you do a strat op, typically the people in Eve Uni who know how to use intelligence and know at least the basics of how to get it, they are typically very reliable about actually doing that thing. Um, at least that was my experience when I did, strat ops in the past, when I was in Eve Uni, that, if we wanted to bat phone someone, there was often someone in the directorate that was like backing me up and keeping eyes on things and doing a lot of the stuff that I'm going to tell you how to do. And what the reason I'm, you know, teaching this class in large part is because I want everyone to like understand these basic skills because they're things that all of you can do. So let's go ahead and start talking about those. Buddha asks in chat, I would like to hear how to handle a fleet when your scout is 3 to 5 jumps away. Should we gradually move forward? Should we hold position? That's going to come. We will talk about that later. But the one thing I'm going to say now is that if you have one scout and your fleet is like not if your fleet has like more than 15 people in it, you should always have multiple scouts, and so that shouldn't even be an issue. um and they should be like actual scouts, which is what we're about to talk about. Okay, so let's start by defining what scouting is. The easiest way to describe what scouting is that it's gathering information, and it's gathering information while you're like flying a ship out in space in Eve. So it's not using out of game tools directly. We'll talk about that in a minute. It's not typically what we call spying. What it really is about is flying a spaceship and using spaceships in space. Um, and this happens both close to the fleet and far away. There are There are many kinds of scouting, which we'll discuss in more detail in a moment. And then the other thing is that it often involves navigation. That is, it involves being able to plan and execute a route through a number of systems where you have like a goal in mind and you are plotting a series of jumps in your ship to effectively achieve that goal. And it also often involves intelligence, and it's when those overlap, we call it reconnaissance, which we'll talk about in a minute. So let's talk about like some concrete examples of what scouting is like. Oh, sorry, my bad. First, let's talk about defining what intelligence is. So there are a number of famous Eve personages on the slide here. Up at the top left, we have Titus Talling of Eve University, and we have Titus here because when we talk about intelligence, there is a kind of thing that is intelligence, which is not what we are talking about, and we can define it like this. If you take Titus's personality and you take out all of the salt, all of the snarkiness, all of the pedantry, all of his love for Eve University, and all of his hatred of nullsec dwellers, what's left is intelligence. Um, but we're not talking about being smart. We're talking about the process of gathering information. So, here we have on the going clockwise around the four, we have the Mittani, aka Mittens. The Mittani is, of course, the leader of the Imperium. He also started out as a spy master. He ran the Goonswarm Intelligence Agency, the GIA, back before they started calling it the Black Hand when they got really obsessed with Warhammer. And in GIA, they ran lots of false flag operations. They did a lot of corporate infiltration, sabotage, and then Mittens sort of got his name off of doing or off of claiming responsibility for director level theft, which we'll talk about in a moment in more detail. When we talk about intelligence gathering, we really mean using tools of some sort to gather, compile, and analyze information. So you use .lam, you use zkill, you use quote unquote the meta, which goons will not shut up about. And we'll talk about all of those, but especially .lam and zkill in more detail. Spying and infiltration is another big thing. So you can get someone into a hostile corporation. You can scrape their channels. Do folks know that when you are in EVE Online, the default setting is that every chat window you have is like logged into a text file?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
we use that for our post-fleet parsing of the fleet log to look at kills and stuff.
fantastic. It's used in a bunch of ways. It's unfortunately used to automate certain types of intelligence so that, for example, programs like Near2 can scrape an Alliance Intel channel and then like ping you, like give you an audio warning if there are hostiles like in your region or within a certain number of jumps from where you rat or you Rorqual mine, which has probably had a bad effect on like the amount of content available in nullsec. You can also use channel scraping or copy people's Discord pings or do other things just, in order to gather intelligence, right? So, for example, if you're in many nullsec alliances, when they rat, they have a channel where people in a certain system who are ratting call what anomaly they're currently ratting in so that other people don't warp into them, right? So if you're in that alliance, you can set up a scraper for the log of that chat channel, and that will tell you all kinds of things. It will tell your if you want to have some bad guys, if you want to have your real masters go in and gank a super capital, the rate at which these anomalies are updated by a specific pilot tells you how quickly they're clearing anomalies. And since only supers can clear havens at a certain rate, right? Then if someone's posting new havens at that rate, then you know it's a super and you know what person it is. And that means you can get warp-ins on them more easily if you're AWACSing, and you can just get better intelligence on who has supers in a given alliance as well. Um, and you can like know what the leaders of a given alliance are pinging to their people if you have like a Discord scraper set up. So those are all things that you can do like really at a very low level of effort if you've infiltrated a hostile entity. um One thing that is not covered in intelligence, right, is any type of like burning a spy. So if you look at the people who aren't Titus here, you've got Mittens and you've got Graf Telkin of Pandemic Legion, and then in the lower left, the really old image is a guy named Istvan Shogatsu from a group called the Guiding Hand Social Club. And for many of us, we first heard of EVE Online from a PC Gamer article that was published like well over 10 years ago now, I think about 12 years ago now, about the Guiding Hand Social Club's infiltration of a corporation. They were hired to like humiliate this corporation. They infiltrated it. They killed and potted the leader of the corporation. They stole all of the corporate assets and burned everything on their way out. And that was like the first big, like really big infiltration in Eve, and it made PC Gamer. Hargoth Agamar flipping from Bob to Goons, led to the original Band of Brothers alliance being disbanded, and they lost all their Sov. Uh, and then Goons invaded Delve. This is back in like I think 2009, and then Judgment Day, of course, last year. The Goons flipped a director in the Alliance Circle of Two, right, the Judge, and he stole like a ton of Alliance level assets from CO2. The leader of CO2 made some real life threats and was banned by CCP permanently for that, if you recall. And CO2 as a relevant entity in this game was, permanently killed as a result. Um, and all of these, as well as the famous clip of Graf Telkin yelling at PL because they lost a revenant to an easy to really obvious bait, and Graf yelling at them that PL has no less than 12 spies in Black Legion, and that no one who was like YOLOing supers around thought to check whether Black Legion was staging. So what all of these have in common is that when you burn a spy to like destroy an alliance or steal all their stuff or humiliate them, um, every time you burn a spy, you may achieve some valuable objective, but your spy's value for like gathering intelligence ends permanently. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Like, you can have someone's pings forever, right? And you can use those pings. You can have someone's comms forever. You can have, your spy sitting in enemy comms and just like reporting back in a fleet fight who the next primary is, so that you're told to so that you can tell your line members to broadcast like in advance of them being primaried, so that the guardians like start cycling reps really fast, and you can like occasionally get out ahead of alpha if you're in like slave to Macarials or something. Like that's a really cool thing that you can do, and you can do that with a spy. But when you burn the spy, all of those cool things end, and if it's worth it, that's great. But they're burned. Like the spy, the Bill or NC dot spy and goons who lit a Sino on the 9-4 Keepstar a couple weeks ago and got like 5 of our supers to jump to the wrong Sino and get murdered. Like that's really funny, and it was a good trick. And I mean, come on, NCPL probably have other spies and goons for him, so it's not a big deal. But like that particular character is never going to spy for PL again, because everyone knows that he's a spy, right? So burning your spies is the end of intelligence. It's not is not something intelligence agencies do. All right, so let's talk about scouting in a little bit of depth. Okay, so we've got several types of scouting that I've sort of laid out on this table here, and you can always go back and look at this slide later for like specific details. I'm just going to. Oh yes, sorry. I did advance the slide, but it didn't. It didn't like show you the slide, which was super annoying. Um, there's like a separate command that you have to click for like the all of you to see it, and I'm
Yeah.
not sure why that is.
Thanks.
Um, yeah, so you guys all see the table now, right?
Yep. I'm.
Cool. And
Maybe you might want to touch on this after, if you, or maybe you're already going to answer it. I just was going to ask the question, because you've described these, you've got this table of scouting techniques. It sounds to me like those are kind of pretty much all the same things that you were saying earlier that scouting isn't. In that the +1, the -1, the fast tackle, hunting, like roaming, like that's all what we do as our stereotypical uni scouting.
So some of these things are things that the uni doesn't do well, and then like the +1 and the fast tackle are a subset of scouting, right? They're a thing you do in space to gather information for the fleet, and they're not bad, but they're incomplete. And if you only do those things when you scout, it's not going to work out for you. So you want to be very careful, like having someone who does fast tackle and like reports back. That's great. It's totally okay to do that. You just need to be covering other roles. You don't necessarily need to have AWOC tackle in all of your fleets. In fact, I think you might get in trouble if you like used that too much in EVE Uni. I'll explain it in a moment. Um, but each of these others are things that, if you're not doing them, you should consider why you're not doing them and maybe fix that. So hunting is like what I call Sino hunters, which are people who like roam around looking for someone to tackle, and then they light a Sino and you drop them. Obviously you only do that if you have a Bridge Titan or if you're blopsing, so that one you can also get away with like not doing all the time, right? Um, Also, quickly, if you look over at the next to rightmost column, the moldy box one, right? So if you look at these different categories, um, you can multi-box like some of these things, and my general belief is that people in the FC channel pretty much should be multi-boxing most of the time. That's how I play the game, and it's a good way to sort of level up. Once you've been in FC for a while, like having useful outs is a really good thing to do, and it will be good. It will be good for you in the long run, and you should do it. And so it's hard to multi-box fast tackle, and it isn't easy to multi-box a roaming scout, but like this other stuff can easily be multi-boxed, right? Because if you're Sino hunting, right, you're piloting your prospect or your bomber or your T3, and then like you could just have like a DPS bomber or a Black Ops ship or a recon sitting on your bridge and ready to go, and like there's no reason not to be multi-boxing that if you have the extra account. Similarly, like if you've infiltrated an enemy corporation, right? So like everyone who FCs in the initiative has an out and horde, because like you can get an out and horde with no effort, and there's no cost to it really. Like it can just be like on the same account that your super capital or whatever is on, so you don't really need to have them both logged on at the same time most of the time. And so like if you've got an AWOX tackle out where you're like going to use your blue status to sneak up on someone and set up a Sino on them in some way, like you should be flying like with your corporation at the same time. There's just no excuse for like only flying your AWOX character. What is AWOXing? So Welcome asks, what is AWOX? Years ago, a character named AWOX took great joy in like infiltrating corporations and then killing the other people in the corp to grief them. And when we say AWOXing, it refers to like uh dishonorably hunting blues. So for example, you put an alt into CVA or some other like Providence member alliance, and then you use that alt to get to make it easier for you to drop on ratting carriers in Providence, right? And that's especially useful if you really don't like a particular alliance and you really want them to lose their space. Then like AWOXing and doing other things that like spread distrust and demoralize the enemy are super useful. In Eve Uni, you don't really have enemies like that, so unless you can like sneak an alt into Pirate or some other crappy high sec war deck alliance, I'm not really sure how that would be super relevant, but don't worry about it too much. Oh come on, Snuff are mostly okay. Also, you can't just like one does not simply get an alt into Snuff. Like, if you want to, if you want to like get a sense of how much work that is, just look up their recruitment forum online. Anyone can see their recruitment forum, and their standards for new recruits are easily visible. If your AWOX character just happens to have like a useful dread alt, for example, that you're also bringing into Snuff, like at some point that's not your alt, it's your main, right? Let's see here, other things on the table that might be useful. So you guys all know how to do fast tackle. You guys mostly know how to +1, and occasionally you understand -1ing. A roaming scout thing that the better scouts. Oh shoot! 1 second. Okay, can you see the slide again?
We can see the table, which hasn't changed.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good. That's what we want. Good. Okay, so like the better scouts in Eve Uni, folks like Declan, for example, understand how to roam ahead of the fleet. But like it should be normal that you have a +1 and a roaming scout on like any fleet where you've got more than 15 people. Like that should be the default. And then the thing that almost nobody in Eve Uni does, and you should, is having eyes. And what that means is you have an alt. It can be like a Jita alt or some other like basically, insignificant character that you don't need most of the time. But someone in your fleet channel should have eyes in like staging systems where someone's going to drop you. So for example, if you're roaming in Black Rise and you're anywhere within jump range of Rakapos, which is one of the places where Snuff stages, you should have eyes in Rakapos so that you don't get hot dropped like that. That's when Union seems to sprinkle a shade of salt around the idea of Snuff and the fact that they like to hot drop people. Like a lot of that is an example of the earlier comments that I made, right, where I point out that you shouldn't like judge the people who defeat you. You should figure out how to gather intelligence better so that you're not getting hot dropped all the time, because that's something you can solve. The one thing that you want to know about using eyes is that they typically shouldn't be in corp, right? So if you put, if Pandemic Horde puts someone who's puts a character that's in Pandemic Horde in its northern staging of J5A, like we know Horde has eyes on us. Maybe we care, maybe we don't, but like we already know. Whereas if there's just some random neutral, like it could be Horde, it could be PL, it could be Guardians of the Galaxy, it could be probably not Snuff because they're blue to us, but it could be Shadow Cartel or like any number of other entities, right, who could be annoying to us. It could be Losec Nyas or Lupin, who we really don't like and who don't really like us. And any of those people, yeah, it could be Eve Uni, but like the day Eve Uni hot drops us is the day you guys have truly leveled up. We'll just be proud of you for that. I mean, someone in T-Grad will probably be super salty, but T-Grad is often super salty, so that's okay. Yeah. So, any questions about stuff on the table?
Yeah. Do you have a suggestion on tools or means of determining where to place eyes for a given entity?
That would involve gathering intelligence, which is covered later in the lecture.
All right.
Boo could you share a fit for a hunting T3C for smaller Sino hunters? Ask Sanguine. Actually, I don't really blops like at all. Like I have a redeemer for dropping on people, but like I don't really hunt, and I don't really. I'm not familiar with that meta, so ask Sanguine or ask Lexa Griffin over in Hidden Flame, or someone else who does a lot of covert hunting. Any
Can
other
I ask?
questions? Yeah.
Yeah, about neutral alts. Do you recycle them or do you keep the same? And is it expected for FC to do everything, or can FC just say, "Hey, I need like 5 neutral alts who X up, please, and put ice in this and this and this system," or how does it usually work?
So the FC certainly doesn't have to do everything. So for example, if I'm out roaming right now, like so one thing that I don't know if Eve Uni people do, you certainly didn't do it when I was in Eve Uni. Do folks have like a separate FC channel that they sort of default to using now?
Only on like you said on StratOps.
Okay, that was my experience too, that you only did it when it was like super serious business.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the reason you use the FC channel is because that way you can have a bunch of stuff going on without sort of like disrupting the fun of your line members where they just like get to talk about random stuff. So if I'm roaming, I often have like 5 or 6 people in the FC channel who are usually dual boxing something in the fleet, and then either a scepter that's roaming or getting me +1 eyes, or they've got a neutral alt in PL staging or whatever. Like they're all doing something useful that like helps me out, right?
Uh, yeah, but I would like to point out that I mean I have Halt in Horde as well, and I noticed that I learn a lot more on Unifleets because we hear everything that FC hears, or most of the time, and it's super extra helpful, especially when you start out uh, thinking about FCing, listening to how FC talks to scouts and stuff like that. And in Horde, where you don't hear that, it's really you're kind of guessing what's going on, and people are just spur drinking comms, and it's kind of you don't learn as much. So I don't think that's actually necessarily the downside. But like you said, yeah, it's plus minus.
I mean, so two things about that. The first one is that part of the reason that Horde comms are not useful is because Horde has a culture where like they expect very little of line members. Um, how to put this? Horde expects less of its line members than Eve Uni expects of its line members by and large, and Eve Uni expects very little of line members. Um, like if you're a body flying the correct fit in Horde, like they mostly just don't care what else you do, and unless you're flying something really important for the fleet or otherwise relevant, and often then they pull you up into command chat anyway. The other thing is that prospective FCs should totally get pulled into the FC channel. And if you've got a very small roam, then it may not matter that you have people reporting potentially sensitive intel. But in my world, like a roaming fleet is usually like 10 to 25 people. At which point, like at the low end of that, FC channels probably aren't necessary. At the high end of that, they often are. And then a strat op, that's like 45 or to 60 people minimum, and that's for like a sort of boring US time zone form up where we're just not like really herfing and getting people into fleet. So with those numbers, like it's genuinely hard for FCs actually to be in main comms and talk, and that's even aside from like any kinds of concerns about spying or sensitive intel. Any other questions about the table?
So, for instance, for small fleets like 15 to 30 people, how many neutral eyes do you usually need, or it's desirable to have?
Depends on where you are. 2 to 3 isn't bad. Um, like if we're roaming, so like if we're roaming in Black Rise, right? Um, we probably don't care that much. Like we probably want to have eyes in EHA to see if Calcef or people like that or Block are gonna drop us. We usually want to check. We either check or like we make sure we have like a roaming scout checking the pipe toward Tama and Sujirento so that you know if our draw is doing something, we know that they are doing something. Like you don't necessarily have to have eyes in the staging system if the staging system isn't within jump range for you, and so you can potentially like move your eyes from system to system also to like somewhere that's more relevant. When we were doing some stuff down in Curse a couple of months ago now, like we only really ever needed a maximum of 3 eyes ever when we were doing stuff in Curse because we needed eyes on Jamundo where PL were living at the time. We needed eyes on Oshit, which is where NC Dot were living at the time, and we needed eyes in um whatever the system of fraternity the Chinese were living in. And if you had those 3, like that was all of Curse, and so you didn't really need anything else. Often you just don't need much more than that. And the people who have like lots of neutral alts like to get eyes everywhere, that's like a special sort of person. And I'm pretty sure Asmo can do that if he wants. But like I don't know that many other people in EVUNI have that range of alts out there. Anything else?
No, that's cool. So just to summarize, then it sounds like it's really about who lives near to the or could bring threat into the area where you're roaming.
Yes, exactly.
On this track, also you're looking for something to fun.
What's that?
Do you expect eyes to tell you only a threat, or you also expect them to tell you that okay, there is something in the system which you can shoot?
I mean, yeah, you want your scouts to also tell you if there's something you can shoot. Like it's not purely defensive, right? If yeah, Buddha, your mic is like not great, and it was hard for me to make that out. But if I understand it correctly, the question was whether it's just not getting hot dropped, or whether you also want like offensive intelligence, and of course you want any intelligence. If you see Ardroff forming a bunch of like zealots to go somewhere, like that's interesting if you've got something that can like harass or even kill zealots. Here's another little blurb about why scouting is super important. Like, there's this little screenshot from the new uni rules um, on the right hand, and I'm mentioning that just because like Eve Uni is bashing more things now. You're third partying more structure fights. Having eyes and gathering intelligence are crucial for being able to third party things. So to the extent that you want that kind of content, it's very important to like actually get that kind of content when you can. The other thing is that the other part of this is that like capitals are capital proliferation is a thing, the ability to hot drop more and more people is a thing, and so you want to like avoid that as well, if that makes sense. All right, let's move on. Okay, so another concept here is reconnaissance, and recon is the interaction of scouting and intelligence. Recon is what you have when a scout is gathering intelligence for the fleet. And this happens in a few different ways, but like the 2 basic categories that you want to be familiar with are direct reporting, which is you see something on your overview, or you see something on your D-scan and you just immediately report back to the FC. And that's like really straightforward stuff, and EVUNI folks learn to do that very well most of the time. And when you learn it, like the main way to upgrade that is just to like have more scouts in more places so that you have more info to pass on that way. The other aspect of recon is something that a lot of folks in EVUNI don't do so well, which is an issue because you need to learn because it's actually a very basic skill. And if you're not able to do this, you're actually not scouting well because you're not providing recon consistently to the FC. So like a couple of people in this room are people that I know how to do this and do it reliably, but I also know that like even like for the last few months that I was FCing in EVUNI, if I asked for a D scan of the enemy fleet, it often like took a non-trivial amount of time to like explain to the person who was scouting what that meant and get them to actually do it. So like you want this to be a normal thing, not a sometimes thing. So the procedure's super easy. You click the DScan window, or you click local, or you click your overview, and you control A, and then you paste all of that info into a parsing website like a dashboard or dscan.me or whatever. And what that does is it lets the website like refine the information, and you can pass the refined info to the FC as opposed to like trying to personally count, how many Macarials are in the NC fleet, because that's just a pain. You can't do that. It would take you ages to actually do that, like much counting, and so it's just way better to have be a natural thing where you just like Control A, Control V, link it over. Union says in chat that he thinks EVUNI are better nowadays, and if that's true, I'm very glad to hear it.
Yeah, it's improved a lot.
Cool, good for you. There's another set of things which are not basic, which are more advanced recon, right? So it sort of shows up in two categories. One of these is finding targets, which you do typically before the fleet, yeah. And the other one is like not being a target. So finding targets, you can scout moons and figure out which moons are good. You can hack citadels or other upwell structures to find when they're vulnerable so that you can bash them more effectively. That was added in the patch this past Tuesday, and it's super important because that lets you know like exactly what time the armor timer will happen, if it will happen, and it also lets you know what day and what time the hull timer will happen, and both of those are really important for planning purposes. Wormhole recon is a thing. You can scan chains to regions you like to hunt. You can do this either if you're in the wormhole campus and you're like finding content in wormhole space, or if you're although that's just like being in wormhole space, but you can scan chains to K space, or you can scan chains from your staging in K space to like somewhere else in K space that you'd like to kill people in, and all of that is great. Finally, doing scouting well and like gathering that intelligence and getting back to your FC team can let you find opportunities for third partying, which is a great way to find fights, especially now that you can shoot people on like -5 structures. The other category here is not being a target, and this happens when you scout enemy staging and like report that stuff reliably. So for example, if you see a bunch of carriers on dock with a Moros tag on them in Syndicate, chances are pretty damn good that they're dropping EVUNI. So like you wanna respond to that sooner than later. You also want to recognize hostile eyes. Like everyone in this game knows how to use out of corp alts, and so you want to like keep sort of a database of like who out there is scouting for snuff, who's out there for shadow cartel, who's the neutral alt for NC dot in your area. Like those are all useful things to know. And then there's one more thing which is called Sino scouting, and what that is, this is actually kind of in between because you can technically do this while you're docked up or like not in space, but you use the in-game map and you set the active Sino filter. And when you set the active Sino filter, you look for Sinos that light up in systems that are near you, and if a bunch of Sinos light up all at once, that's like people dropping and counter dropping each other, and you should go shoot them, or at least whore on the kill mails. And if it's like a Sino that is like midway between you guys and rocket pods, that means Snuff might be dropping you, and so you want to get like an actual scout into that system as soon as you can, right? Like with the advent of with jump fatigue, being in the game for like almost 4 years now. um the jump fatigue means that if they're going to mid to you, like they have to mid at least like 6 or 7 minutes before they are dropping you, still let their orange timers run out, which means you've got plenty of time to figure out what the hell they're doing and counter it. Any questions about these techniques?
One question about the known alts. Do you like? I'm assuming that within your alliance, you guys probably have some central shared tool for identifying known alts. Back in the day when it was still working parts, Little Helper was pretty good for that sort of thing. Is there some sort of publicly available tool that you can set up to use for yourself where you add your own known alts or something like that?
You could like right click the character in game and add a note to the character.
Yeah. Okay.
You could also like set up, a notepad or a Google document or something and share it to trusted people, or just keep it for yourself. Like any of those are fine.
Yeah. Gotcha.
Eddie asks, isn't the in-game map a few minutes behind? I think it might be a couple minutes behind, but it's certainly not far behind at all. So, like, it's still a valuable source of intel. But also, I don't think it's many minutes behind. It's not that far.
And I think it's not behind at all for Sinus.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much real time. Like what you may be thinking of, Eddie, is specific types of metrics. For example, like recent kills, in which like it's rolling over at a slow rate and is tracking like the kills in the last hour or what have you. Like that's not like telling you what happened immediately, no. But like I think the Sino field thing happens pretty much instantly. Of course, that's for hard Sinos, not covert Sinos. So, like, if a covert Sino lights, that doesn't show up in your overview if you're in the system. That doesn't show up, like, you have to be on grid with it. It doesn't show up on the map or anything. So, like, blops are a thing that you need to watch out for. Any other questions? All right, let's move on to some specific tools for gathering intelligence. So the first of these that I'm going to talk about is Dotlan, which is just an amazing tool for a few different things. You can know what your enemy's capabilities are, right? So if you know where an enemy's staging system is, which you do by like watching Z kill for like where they kill a lot of things in consistently, like week after week. You do it by watching meta sources, by people talking about where the staging is. You also just look you can also like do that from just like having people in space scouting a lot, because eventually you will figure out where people actually stage. So all of those are good ways for identifying stagings, and also your campus combat officer in EVNE should be compiling like lists of stagings in your normal area of operations, just like as a standard default thing. Um, so once you know where your enemy's stage from, you can use Dotlan to find the jump range from places they stage. You can use Dotlan to identify common choke points where like there's consistently a lot of jump activity, or you can find choke points where like lots of Sino routes end up in a specific system. All of those are super helpful for like knowing how people can project power. You can find hotspots. So lots of you know how to do this already. If you don't, you can use the like universe function in Dotland to like look at a region and then filter by recent kills or recent NPC kills. Which can tell you where people are being killed or where people are ratting in a potential target region. Anytime people are ratting a whole lot in a region, so like if you see several hundred to a couple thousand NPC kills in a system over the last hour, that means it's being actively carrier or super carrier ratted. Or possibly like a guy running, 15 VNI alts on Forsaken hubs, I guess. Um, and anytime someone's doing that, the chances are very good that there's also like Rorquals mining there, and so like there's a lot of potential content to drop. There's some limitations to Dotland though. It used to be that Dotland was like this amazing timer board because like you saw all the SOV activity that was going on, and then there was some way to get like reinforced posses on another timer board. I forget the name, and so you could like see like all of the reinforcements and when they came out of reinforcement that were like currently active, and that was pretty great. Um, Dotland doesn't have upwell structure timers, which you can sometimes be involved in, and SOV is still off limits to ETH Uni. So, like, there are some limitations on the intel gathering you can do. Buddha says if we're skeptical about in-game map being updated with delay, then we should be even more skeptical about Dotland. So I believe when it comes to recent NPC kills, Dotland updates about as fast as the in-game map and is also better for that. When it comes to recent kills, there's some lag between like the killboard API and kill mails being generated in game, but it's actually pretty quick for any entity that like uploads its kills automatically to Ckill, and the lag's just not that bad. But also, like, if we're completely convinced about the need to be skeptical, that just means you need to have more people in space, like, looking for stuff. Like, you can't be playing Eve from, like, your web browser. You need to actually have people in space doing stuff, if that makes sense. Cool. Any other questions?
I guess one question you mentioned about identifying where sino routes tend to go through in order to keep an eye. If you wanted to, you could put eyes in a system, for instance. Do you do that just by looking at jump ranges from various like high sec systems, or how do you identify those sort of common pathways for sino?
So, one of the things that you really want to pay attention for there, so there are a number of gates in nullsec, for example, that are called pirate or smuggler stargates. And those like link nullsec regions that are actually very far away in terms of light years, such that it's actually often impossible for carriers or for capital ships or bridges to like go across those gates. And so a lot of those are very important. So what you look for there is you want to know where the the smuggler stargates are, and then you want to also know where the which of the regions that have those smuggler stargates, which of those regions are like controlled by like opposing groups. So for example, the smuggler gate between Delve and Fountain isn't interesting because the goons on one side of that, and then I forget whether it's in it or goons, but like the Imperium owns both sides of that smuggler route, and so you don't really care. But for example, the gate between Cloud Ring and Pureblind actually is important because if you want to drop on Horde space, you can't be in Cloud Ring for like the Horde space that's in Pureblind and Fade. You have to be in on the Pureblind side of that gate. Does that make sense?
Okay, yep, cool, thanks.
let's see here, and we'll talk about Intel Decay and Horde in a moment here because that's another topic. Okay, so another way you can gather intelligence is using Zkill, right? Zkill doesn't update perfectly, as we've established. It doesn't. Not everything is uploaded to Zkill, and you don't always, and doesn't always upload instantly. Especially if there's like a really big fight, you'll find that like sometimes you get these really you sometimes get these like really big uh like bursts of like 8 capitals dying, in the same second that those notifications like all pop up at once, and that's because Zkill's not updating instantly, right? So, but it's not perfect, but nonetheless, like, if you look at a hotspot system, so for example, I've put Oix in one of these screenshots, right? This is a screenshot of like the recent kills in Oix when I made this slideshow. If you look at those kills, you can see who's doing the kills, right? It's Fed Up and Block, so Galmill and Calmill were skirmishing again in Oix like they always do. And if you look at what's dying and what's doing the killing, you can figure out what they're flying, right? And then the next step is if you if you're familiar with the region, you can turn that knowledge into guessing where they might be going and figuring out some way to project your forces to there so that you can get a fight that favors you. The other thing you can do with Zkill is you can target like specific corporations or alliances, and you can figure out like recent kills or losses among those folks. So you can find out, if you're near a hostile staging, you can find out if they've been killing people like in the last few minutes or a couple hours. This can also give you a sense of like what time zone different groups are active in if you don't like necessarily know that already. You can also do research. So if you're thinking you might bash someone's structure, or you might be flopsing in a region, or you might be roaming through a region, you can check that like corporations or alliances kills and losses and find out what they frequently fly. You can figure out their doctrine fits, the stuff that they frequently kill people roaming through their space with, and that's really useful information because it helps you plan. And then the final thing, which is where I've linked this kill mail from, I'm actually throwing a renter who rents from Initiative, my alliance, under the bus here, because this is a Rorqual that got killed. For any number of reasons, if you look at this fit, who tends to underfit or badly fit their crabbing ships? Well, this Rorqual pilot is missing a high slot. They're missing a rig slot. They've buffer tanked a ship that's bonused for active reps. They've fit an emergency hull energizer, which apparently is their version of a panic module, because you'll note that there's not a panic module in their high slots. So like everything you can do wrong with a Rorqual, this person did wrong. And when we tried to rescue this person and asked them if they were panicking, they said yes. Yeah, there's also no Sino. Good point. They said yes, they're panicking, and we're not sure whether this is like yes, they were panicking in that they were experiencing the feeling of panic, or whether they thought using their emergency hull energizer, which is only good for like 30 seconds, was like using the panic module. Either way, they died horribly, and we only got to kill like an Ishtar in response. So bad renders are bad. So like when you know that people frequently badly fit their stuff, so for example, FCON before they died, often terribly fit their stuff, and were also really bad at running response forces. So like they were kind of easy prey. Any questions about Zkill?
No, it's really useful. One thing I would add is you can combine different filter criteria, even if it's not sort of in the menus, by building a URL structure to combine like a query by a corporation and a location, or a corporation and a ship type.
For sure, and that's especially useful if, for example, like you want to find out what PL's Macarial fit is. I mean, I know what PL's Macarial fit is. It's the same as Waffle's Macarial fit when I was in Waffles, but if you want to know this, like PL lose a lot of ships because they are an active PvP group. So that's a lot of scrolling to do. But if you can, if you find the type ID for the Macarial and you plug that into PL's loss feed, you can now like find only the Macarials that PL have lost, and then you can like if they've if some special snowflake has lost a whole tanked roaming Macarial, that's the one you can ignore, and then the one that has like 2 plates and arty and a bunch of E-war mids, that's probably the right one. And then you check a couple more in case the first one was either someone who's too poor and was using the wrong resist mods, like weak ones, or maybe they were super rich and they were using a slave pod and you know A types, and you can like sort of figure out where the actual fit is once you've gone through a few of those. There's one more way of gathering intelligence that I want to talk about briefly, which is what I'm calling the meta, because I'm in the Imperium and that's mandatory. The meta is what people say and believe about the game, and independently of game data. So the EVE Online universe is one where there's not only is it the case that there's an objective truth about the universe. So for example, um, in real life, right, if there's a war happening, there will be an actual number of people who are killed in any given day, but like nobody who's actually involved in the war will have perfect information about that. And moreover, not only will they lack perfect information, they will lie about it constantly. And some of that is sort of foreclosed on in the Eve universe because we have this API that tells us like a lot of the losses that occur, which means that we can have a very good idea of how many people actually lost stuff in a given battle. And so not only is the objective truth out there, but it's also like easily knowable by many people. And so the meta is stuff that really bypasses that. Occasionally people like spin, okay, we won the ISK war, so it doesn't matter that we lost this, Fortizar, or vice versa. We lost the ISK war, but we won the objective. People will spin, and that's kind of in the meta, but like a lot of this is stuff that just has very little to do about with objective data about the game. Because of this, you want to take it with a huge serving of salt. I've classified the size of this salt serving as Titus Talling just lost a Titan kill mail because his one Hector got banned by
That's a lot of salt.
So, like, that's about the right amount when you're dealing with meta stuff in EVE Online. Nonetheless, it's worth following for 2 reasons. The first one is that even with the amount of effort that you have to spend to like sort of sort through, you know, the noise to find an actual signal, you nonetheless do want to. It's still easier to do that than, for example, to know from your own research, like your own personal research, where the alliances in every major chunk of the game are. Like Jintan's podcasts on Crossing Zebras are actually super good for a lot of that, because when he talks about like who owns what space and who's in what coalition, like some of that is just wrong. Like he still inexplicably thinks that goons are like part of the same coalition as like southwestern Russians, when like there's one specific Russian alliance down there that is blue to us and the rest aren't allies. uh but like aside from the spin and the occasionally imperfect information, you do get a good sense for like how the game works overall. And this also lets you see the forest instead of just seeing the trees. Like knowing where each individual corporation in the Guardians of the Galaxy coalition up in the Northwest is staged might be nice, but knowing that every corporation and every alliance that's currently in the Guardians of Galaxy coalition is in that coalition is more important, right? Because if you're roaming through one of their space, you don't want to be surprised when, while you were roaming through slice space, darkness just like dropped the hell out of you because they got asked for help. Like that's a normal thing to happen, and you should like know that going in. Um, but again, finally, don't trust, just verify. Like, a lot of stuff is wrong. A lot of stuff is people twisting the truth or just outright lying, and you want to be very careful about that. Where do you get this meta information? So the first one that you can go to, like the first category that I've sort of set up is like news and controversy sources. So places where people talk about stuff and where people argue about stuff. Our Eve is a cesspool, but it's useful for some of this. The Imperium News Network, which ironically is currently run by a dude from NC Dot, and a lot of their main contributors are from the NCPL side of things. It's actually surprisingly a lot less biased than one might expect. Certainly, there was a time when it was a lot more biased, and that's largely past. It's currently far and away the best like current news source on Eve Online, and I say that because Crossing Zebras is an amazing news site, but where INN tends to report recent events, CZ tends to emphasize like deep dives into like details about something, and that's super helpful, but it's not necessarily a source for like up-to-date news aside from the podcasts. So the next category of meta-based intel gathering is from podcasts and like other places where people like talk to each other and talk about stuff vocally. um, that's really helpful because you can do a lot of that stuff. Like, for example, I commute to work, a couple days of the week this semester. So I'm driving a lot. So I can listen to, TIS, a couple of talking in stations, a couple days after it comes out, basically every time. And, I follow a couple of the ones on Crossing Zebras as well. The Mind Clash podcast, for example. Um, there's a couple ones that I listed that are wormhole specific, a game of holes and static talk, and then the Council of Stellar Management has a Discord, and mostly it's people whining about how their special thing in game hasn't been fixed yet. But aside from that, like some of the information is still useful. Finally, there's the official EVE Online forums, and those are just useless. Don't use them. Like, they're just not reliable at all because years of really toxic moderation and bad discursive norms and too many people from HiSec have just rotted those forums to the point of almost complete worthlessness. Any questions about this? All right, let's move on. So there are some ways to have intel not go well, right? One of them is just by not having enough intel. So you need people actually out in space to gather a lot of this stuff. You also need people who are willing to spend their time like personally parsing a lot of the intel that people bring in. So, for example, you can have a recon team go scan every R64 in Syndicate, Outer Ring, and Cloud Ring, and you can totally do that. But like, if someone just makes a big spreadsheet and lists all of the R64s, then they're like, that's already some processing of that intelligence, right? Uh, they've added this information to a spreadsheet so you can read through it, as opposed to just like, I don't know, writing it all down in a notepad or committing it to memory. So there's some organization already there. But even then, you still need someone to like go through and look at it and find patterns and plan operations around this information you've gathered. And so you need a lot of effort to actually gather and analyze intel in a proper time frame. And so part of this lecture, part of what I'm doing here is sort of trying to persuade you that this is worthwhile effort, right? It's something that can actually get you information. The second problem with intelligence is that both in the real world and in EVE Online, intelligence often decays very quickly. That is, the value of intelligence falls off after sometimes just a few days or weeks. So, for example, who can tell me, like off the top of your head, where Pandemic Horde is moving?
Gemini.
Cool. That's right. So, Gobbins made a deal with the drone Russians, and Pandemic Horde is moving to the Geminate region, which means that whenever we decide to let them unanchor their Keepstar and Cloud Ring, that that cloud ring, that map of jump range from the 9-4 Keepstar that we had in the Dotland section, that info is all completely worthless as soon as my alliance decides that we want to let Horde successfully unanchor their Keepstar, right? Similarly, another question for people to see like how familiar you are with the with nullsec as it currently is. If you want to roam or blops in Pravi and kill some not red don't shoot scrubs, because anyone who believes in not red don't shoot is a scrub, what alliances or coalitions might drop supers on you?
I'll let somebody else answer, but yeah, there's two I'm thinking of.
Okay, so
And then
Union immediately names PL, NC, and HTP, Pandemic Legion, Northern Coalition Dot, and Honorable Third Party. Those three are actually all blue to each other, and PL is currently staged in Assaw and has taken a bunch of space in northeastern Pravi. NC Dot has assets near there, I think also in Assaw maybe, or right down the pipe. HTP have long lived in this general area, and I don't remember exactly where they're staged, but they've got caches all over the place. And as I said, they're all blue to each other. Of those three, HTP have a few supers. PL and NC's main super fleets are still up north, but they've got, maybe a dozen or 20 supers, and some folks like to, YOLO, Hells around or Revenants around for fun. So also rip Mr. Meeseeks, because I was in Waffles when Eonin built that rev. He built it all himself. He mined all the stuff himself. He bought the blueprint, or helped incursion grind the blueprint, and like he built that rev himself, and then it died about 6 months later because he actually like built it to use it. So rest in pieces. Ty says Tappy. Test Alliance does indeed have supers there, and Pravi currently has close ties to the Legacy Coalition, which Test runs. If you'd said Brave Newbies, you would have been silly, but you also would have been right. Buddha asks, do you see these counter drops capable of sparking another multi-million dollars fight? So the short answer is no. The long answer is that jump fatigue being what it is, the most you will so I don't think Tests FCs are quite bold enough to drop supers on PL when PL has supers in range. PL may occasionally drop dreads, but they also know that if Test and Legacy drop supers, like it's game over. Like you're not gonna kill Test's super fleet with any number of dreads, and so you literally cannot drop enough dreads and still be ISK efficient. So they're gonna cut their losses and run, as they have a number of times now. So and even if something did happen that was kind of crazy, right? Like you're not going to get it's going to take like a day to get supers from Tribute to Providence. It's going to take a few hours. It's going to take a couple hours to get Goon supers from Delve to Providence, and that's even with like the ridiculously good routes and infrastructure that Goons have, which are not universal. Like it's very different. So like yeah, lots of people have dread caches, but dread caches don't translate to like a huge fight. They translate to a fairly moderate fight. Yeah, but also like you had a lot of Imperium supers in Cloud Ring, a couple of weeks ago, and you had a lot of yeah, and then you had like everyone from you know Declan all the way to like the eastern edge of PL space and RMT space in Vale. Um, and they had all their supers, and so we just sat on Citadels and didn't do anything. It's hard to get a set piece going, and you pretty much have to have a set piece fight now because you're not going to rush supers over in time without already having them pre-staged. Let's see here. Uh, so I want to take a couple minutes to talk about a couple of sort of sample fights where we can kind of put together um, uses of intelligence that really changed an outcome of a fight. And so what I did here is I took two cases where I'd been involved in a fight where the fight was actually pretty even. Like either side could have won it, and the side that did win was because they had a big intelligence advantage. And some of you were on the first fleet. If you weren't on that fleet, you might still, know the names of people involved. And then a number of the people in the room were in the uni fleet for the second of these. So this is one where the fleet I was running, we were roaming through Horde space. We knew PL were sort of vaguely around. We were being shadowed by a scepter, but we didn't know what the what the composition of the gang was, and we didn't know where exactly the gang was. And so when we warped onto a gate that had a Cinnable and a Saber on it, we were super surprised when Muck jumped his entire Roman. Also, Muck Barovian, the guy in the Tengu from Blackwater, is one of the best roaming FCs in the game, and then the FC on the other side was me, and so there was a little bit of a talent disparity there too. So we didn't know they were there. Our only scout was a +1 scepter. We weren't like using out of game intel sources that would tell us that he had a roaming fleet out. And so when 5 PL Cinnables and 4 PL Cinnables and 3 Simis and like a T3 and a broadsword and a claymore all jump through, like my first thought is to jump straight through the gate and sort of get them to jump into us. And that didn't really work very well. And the reason it didn't work was because Cinnables are actually very fast, and so they were able to spread out in a very effective way. Am I breaking up to guys? Say something in chat. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, it seems fine to me.
Okay, it's probably just Buddha's internet again. Sorry. I am recording this. Like I said, I'm gonna have to edit it and like get rid of the Google chat windows that popped up so I don't dox myself, but I am planning on uploading this. Okay, so yeah, so we jumped through, tried to get them to jump through into us, tried to break their logi with confessors, which is, I mean, scimitars have really good EM resists, as you hopefully know, so that was not ideal. We didn't really use our 2 command destroyers to like break them up at all. So like a lot of stuff didn't go very well, and we ended up just whelping the fleet. We killed a Saber and like lost way more than that, as you can see from up at the top. And so that didn't go well. And then if you look, the link there, the bit.ly there is a link to the AAR that I posted in the EVUNI forum. Oh, I apparently forgot to click the second button. So you can see here, a PL fleet on one side, and a Monday Mayhem fleet on the other side with some EVUNI folks and some Init folks, and like a lot of red on the EVUNI side. And then if you look there at the bottom, that button, that link there, the bit.ly, takes you to the AAR posted on the EVNE forums for this fight. I'm gonna leave it here for a second so you can like type that bit.ly out because yeah. Okay, so let's go to the next slide there. Okay, so here's a fight that I'm calling a win. Obviously, it was not a win for the Eve Uni people involved because it was a Monday Mayhem fight where Monday Mayhem was like folks in Fweddit roaming, and we caught some caracals. Um, a bunch of you were in this one. Well, a couple of you, I guess. Yeah, yeah. How did you guess? So this was a fleet where the Eve Uni fleet was one of two fleets that we were watching. So there was some silly stuff said on the Eve Uni forums, largely because Cokester is both salty and often a little bit paranoid about like the evils of like blobby nullsec dwellers or whatever. Um, but there was some silly stuff said about how like we were spying on you guys in some chat channel or something that Sanguine's in. Um, Sanguine didn't say anything to me about this except that that Uni had noobs on patrol fleet out. So knowing that wasn't like a huge deal. What was a big deal was that my CEO was like watching Zkill for me and told me that there'd been NC dot killing some stuff up around like Okamon or Rakapas, and that there had been a uni fleet in a boon that had killed some stuff. And what's funny is that we went up towards Rakapas to find the NC dot snatchfessers because NC dot took Phalanx Fleet from Watfuls, which is like a bunch of beam confessors, and Snatch from Init, and like tried to combine them into a single fleet, but they don't use it very well, and like they've whelped it to Init like at least once before. So we were gonna try and like get them to fight us and then trash them because that's what we expected to happen. And we didn't find them, but like on the route we were going to intercept NC dot, we actually found like a unique Caracal gang. And both of these were like pretty close to our size. I thought it was pretty engageable. So we hunted. We got scepters into the same system as you guys long enough to like give me a D-scan and tell me some info. When we landed on the gate on the other side of the gate from you guys, the whoever was your scepter pilot, I don't remember, it was a pretty new person, I think. Might not even have been a scepter, it might have been like a T1 frigate. But someone like saw my fleet, immediately crashed the gate and told the FC, the guest FC for the Uni Gang, that there were a bunch of frigates on the other side, and so he wanted to fight us. And what he should have said was that there was a bunch of assault frigates with Deacon Logi, and like copy pasted a D scan of it and all of that. And not doing that gave me a big advantage in the actual fight. Nonetheless, there was at least one major scouting failure on my side, which is that uh, I didn't realize until like I called the first Scythe primary and then started looking for other Logi to broadcast. That was the first time I realized that there was only one Scythe in the Uni gang. Like I'd assumed that there were, 3 or 4 scythes, because if you've got 10 cruisers roaming, like 3 scythes is the appropriate number to bring, and 4 scythes is reasonable. And so when we just like shattered the one scythe and there were none others to broadcast, that was a little weird. But like the important thing is that most of the stuff that really shaped the fight was based on intel. In the first fight, I was surprised. I was surprised and made bad decisions and lost. And in the second fight, I had better info than the other guy. Not perfect info, as you can understand, but I had good info. And that info was enough to win. Buddha asks a good question. You can imagine having dedicated overview tabs for Logi and for tackle. The anti-tackle one is a standard tab in the Z-S overview. A logistics tab that gets you Logi cruisers and maybe T2 Logi frigates, and I think probably maybe faxes as well. I'm not sure, but like that also exists as default in the ZS overview. I don't think that you can exclude, like you can disambiguate T1 logistics cruisers from like the other types of cruisers, though. Declan says no, and I don't have any information that would suggest otherwise. Any other questions about these sort of like fight breakdowns? And again, if you look down at the bit.ly, that will take you to the AAR that I wrote for this fight. You can scroll up from my AAR to find the things that Conchesi posted and that Cokester posted. And then mine is, I think, down at the bottom because I killed another thread on the uniforms. All right, so that is what I've got for the lecture. Sorry, Buddha? Union asks, I mentioned that my CEO told me about the fleets. So there's a few people in my corp who are like very good at handling intelligence, and Niv was just in the FC channel with me. Buddha asks, how many Logis did I have in that fight against the Caracals? The ones that show up on the they're not there. Okay, yeah, so
like
I
5
had
or 6.
what? No, I had 3 deacons.
Okay.
Like yeah, I had 3 deacons. We almost lost one. Like you guys overheated it, like switched some rapid lights back and forth, and one of the deacons got really close to dying, but it repped through. Like basically we cleared Caracal DPS faster than the deacon died, and just barely saved it. I think he was in like 40% structure when like he stopped taking meaningful damage. Deacons are amazing, and AB deacons
Yes.
with like like the signature's tiny. We had armor resist and buffer links. We had, I forget which skirmish links. I can't remember if we had the SIG reduction, but I know for sure we had the tackle range, and I think we probably had the speed over the SIG. But like that's a very tough nut to crack, and yeah.
Assault frigates were awesome before the buff. Now they're great.
Yeah, I mean, assault frigates as a class were kind of questionable prior to the buff. And like so the funny thing about assault frigates is that they don't really have a role as a class. What they have is like different ones are good at different things. So like Hawks and now Jaguars are amazing solo ships in low sec if you can get someone who will actually fight you. But it's actually hard to get people to fight you because everyone knows double MASB Hawks are like ridiculously hard to break. And then like the armor wolfpack thing is okay in low sec, and it was always okay. It just got really outclassed for a few months when like Tech 3 destroyers were Confessors and Svipples were somewhat overpowered, and then B, Confessors and Svipples could go into small faction warfare plexes and just dominate there. And now that they're locked into mediums, like there's definitely a role for assault frigates in low sec. The funny thing about assault frigates is that like their main weakness as a fleet concept is that they have bad DPS compared to like other small size ships. Like they're not like assault frigates don't have much better DPS than comparable frigates do. And then CCP went and buffed their tank when their tank was already pretty good and did basically nothing to their DPS. So yeah. So now you have like as much buffer as a T3D does before you turn on the silly invulnerability module, and then your DPS is still like somewhere between a third and a half of what a comparable T3D has. Okay, so that's what I've got for the slides. As I said, so you can contact me in a bunch of ways if you have questions about the lecture or about anything else that's Eve related. My email address is here, but like the best ways to find me are on alumni Slack or on the public Fweddit Discord. We also have like a coordination channel called Friends of Chicken, where we like set up potential bat phones and coordination with other folks. I know Buddha's in it, and if any of the others of you would like to be in it, feel free to like let Buddha know, or message me or email me in game, and I'll make sure that you get in. So yeah,